One of the greatest and most memorable historical games in chess history with the given nickname the Game of the Century is between Donald Byrne and Bobby Fischer. Bobby Fischer, who was 13 years old at that time, invents one of the greatest attacks ever seen. After a brilliant queen sacrifice, Fischer uses the created opportunity to continuously check Byrne's king with his minor pieces while developing them simultaneously and slowly separating all of Byrne's remaining pieces from his king.
How are you here when I killed you, and why are you transparent?
I came back as a ghost to haunt you, now scream.
White is developing his pieces in the center of the board with the idea of establishing good central control. Black, on the other hand, develops based on the hypermodern principles, which are essentially a counterplay to central development. White continues to develop his pieces in the center, but as soon as the bishop is developed, Black moves his pawn to d5. This opening is the Grunfeld defense. Black traded his pawn and White recaptured with his queen. This was a brilliant exchange for Black because now the c4 square is taken by the queen and White's bishop will have to develop elsewhere. Black also moved his pawn to c6 because both White's queen and bishop were attacking the pawn. Now White can't compromise Black's position. Black developed his knight to b6 to attack the queen and White moved his queen to c5. Even though this was not the best move, White was still doing okay, but after responding to Black's g4 bishop attack with his bishop to g5, he absolutely blew it. White broke one of the most fundamental rules in chess, which is to not move a piece twice in the opening, in this case his bishop. White's idea is to pressure the e7 pawn, but this never happens because Black severely punishes the fundamental mistake White did in his next move. Knight to a4 on the surface looks like Black just gives away his knight for free. However, if White takes with his horsey, then Black will use his other knight and take the e4 pawn and create a brilliant double attack on the queen and the bishop. Therefore White doesn't take it. White used his bishop to attack the rook and the queen simultaneously. White finally develops his second bishop to d4, but why did he not take the rook? Because Black would simply retake with their bishop and this will attack White's queen. Then regardless of what move White played, Black will simply move his other rook to e8. This will create the risk of a discovered attack when the Black horsey moves, and if that happens, White will be in big trouble. Brilliant queen sacrifice by Black. Get ready to see one of the greatest attacks invented in chess history. Beautiful. This is the perfect example of bishops and knights working together to cause havoc on the board. Even though White still has his queen, Black has full control over the chessboard. Notice how many moves Black waited before he captured the rook with his knight. The reason is that Black wanted to improve his position even further. As a result, White now has very limited options on the board. Even with his queen on the board, White can't do much. Black's pieces are working together perfectly. White's queen and knight can't do anything, especially when they are separated. White tries to create some counterplay by moving his pawn to h4. Black stops it with his pawn on h5. White moving his knight to e5 was his last attempt to create counterplay, and after he moved his king to g1, White lost the game. After Black's queen sacrifice and the devastating attack pattern we saw earlier, it was impossible for White to survive. His defeat was inevitable. Black's pieces worked together perfectly, delivering a series of checks one after another until they got the White king where they needed him to be, while the king was completely isolated from his pieces and delivered the checkmate. This, ladies and gentlemen, was the greatest game played in the 20th century. Our second game is between Nigel Short and Jan Timman. This game is adored by many chess players from all around the world due to Nigel's magnificent display of vigor and boldness. After taking full advantage of his complete control over the chessboard and brilliantly developed pieces, Nigel brings his king into the action and initiates an unstoppable attack that forces Timman to forfeit. This is referred to as a king's march, and it's rarely used because you disregard your king's safety.
Make way.
Yes, my king.
White initiates the game by moving his pawn to e4 and Black responds with the Alekhine defense. The Alekhine defense is a hypermodern approach, and with this opening Timman allows Nigel to develop in the center to prove it overextended. Timman knew that Nigel was going to use his pawn to chase his knight around the board and that he'll use his two central pawns to occupy the center. He was prepared for it. By moving his pawn to d6, black fully commits to the hypermodern approach. Countering white's central development by applying high pressure to his center is black's strategy. We see that white prioritizes rapid development and secures the e5 strong point with his queen and minor pieces by providing additional protection. This is also one of the rare exceptions where moving the queen from the starting position early on is a good thing, because all of the minor pieces from the king side are developed and the queen is enforcing the protection of the e5 strong point. Even though black developed his bishop to g7, adding more pressure to white's center, at the moment white has too many pieces protecting the e5 pawn, and black's pressure does very little to help him. Both sides escort their majesties to safety. Timman moves his pawn to a5, threatening to advance on the a4 square and create an attack. Nigel immediately responds and secures the a4 square with his pawn. Timman initiated the attack with the intent of breaking Nigel's central foothold, and he brilliantly positioned his horsey on d4, attacking the white queen and two minor pieces. This forced Nigel to trade his knight. By trading horses with white, black activates his queen at the same time and positions her on the center of the board. A queen occupying the center is very powerful because she can move all over the chessboard and establishes good control over the field if there are no available pieces who can push her back. Beautiful. On top of bringing his rook behind the queen to create double protection for the vulnerable pawn, Nigel also developed his second knight and placed it on f3 to attack Timman's queen, while at the same time adding even more protection to the pawn. Timman immediately offers a queen trade when Nigel positions his queen in the center. Nigel refuses the queen trade. If he accepted this queen trade, it would not be beneficial for him because his queen occupying the center has the potential to do way more than it did for Timman due to his better development. White is even willing to damage his pawn structure just so he can keep his queen in the center. White wants to trade his bishop so that he can get his queen close to the king in his next move. Now things are getting interesting. White offered a trade just so that he could mate black's king if he took the bait and traded his rook for white's. It would have been a mate because then the white queen would recapture and the black king could not run anywhere due to white's dark square bishop brilliantly positioned on h6. Black saw through white's trickery and moved his bishop to b7, creating a battery with the queen and pinned the horsey to its place. The knight can't move because if he does, black will checkmate white by moving his queen to g2. It's clear at this point that no matter what move Timman plays, it would do him little to no good. Most of his pieces are poorly developed and there is no way for them to impact the game, especially since Nigel took full advantage of the rapid development of his pieces and used them accordingly to invade Timman's side of the board and severely restrict his movement. Now the long-awaited king march starts. Black realized white's intentions far too late, and moving his bishop to c8 won't do anything to save him now. With this move, black resigned. There is no way he could prevent the checkmate that would have happened in the next two moves. Bringing the king out in the open is usually frowned upon until the late game, but in this game that's not the case. Nigel brilliantly demonstrated that the king can be used as an attacking piece that should be taken advantage of if an opportunity presents itself in the game.